The smell of lemon disinfectant hit before the words did. Belinda's perfume, sharp and smug, lingered as she slid the paper across the table. Separation for cultural misalignment. My hands went cold. 12 years erased in 12 minutes. I remember the sound of my badge hitting the desk, small, final, humiliating. But what she didn't know was that the system she used to bury me still had my fingerprints coded into its bones. Drop your city below. I want to know where you're watching from. The HR office smelled like lemon polish and quiet judgment. Belinda Cross sat across from me, her smile rehearsed, her tone syrupy. "Dora," she began, "we've decided to move in a new cultural direction." Behind her, the blinds were half closed, slicing the morning light into gray stripes across my hands. I waited for the real reason, budget cuts, restructuring, anything. But she kept talking about values alignment and tone mismatch. Then Grant Weller, the CEO, stepped in like a man arriving late to a play he didn't care to watch. He didn't even sit down. "It's finalized," he said flatly, eyes already on his phone. "Security will escort you out after this." My ears buzzed, the words barely registering. I'd given 12 years, written every audit report, cleaned up their legal messes. And this was how it ended, with a scripted dismissal and a perfumed smirk. Belinda slid the exit packet across the desk as if handing over a parking ticket. "We expect professionalism during the transition," she added, her nails clicking against the folder. Transition. That word stabbed deeper than anything else. The guards waited outside the door, bored, ready to collect my badge. I forced a nod, though my throat burned. "Of course," I said quietly, standing. My legs felt like they didn't belong to me. When I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the glass door, tired, small, erased. But what Belinda didn't know was that she'd just fired the only person who knew how to make the system remember. I drove home without turning on the radio. The silence felt heavier than traffic. Every stoplight, every reflection in the windshield showed me someone who used to belong somewhere. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my badge was still hanging from the mirror, like an obituary. Inside, I dropped the HR envelope on the counter and watched it slide open, spilling its contents like ashes. Non-disclosure agreements, exit clauses, and that polite little line at the bottom. "We appreciate your contributions." I laughed once, dry and hollow. The next morning, I tried to log into my work email out of habit. Access denied. The system I built, the compliance dashboard I spent years maintaining, was still there, but I was already gone from it. My name erased from user permissions, replaced by something new. Cross, Belinda. The irony stung worse than the firing. She'd taken my work, my credit, my authority, and signed her name over it, like a thief in broad daylight. I scrolled through Helion Dynamics' social feed. There she was, smiling with Grant, under a banner that read, "Helion's New Culture Initiative." My eyes caught the caption, "Building Transparency, one team at a time." I nearly threw the phone. I opened my LinkedIn profile and saw they'd already removed my title. The company line now listed vacant, where my position once was. 12 years of diligence wiped out like a typo. But beneath the humiliation, something else stirred, an awareness that I still remembered everything they wanted forgotten. Every approval, every red line, every line of code and document version left my digital fingerprints. They thought cutting my access would erase me, but they forgot the most basic principle of compliance. Systems remember. The servers don't truly delete, they archive. And somewhere, under layers of forgotten storage and mirrored drives, my signature still existed. I looked at the old external hard drive sitting on my shelf, its label faded, written in black marker. Legacy Euro 9. My hand hovered over it, pulse quickening. I hadn't touched it in years, but I knew what was inside. Ghost copies, logs, backups I was never supposed to keep. My career was gone. My reputation burned. But maybe, just maybe, the truth hadn't been buried deep enough. The days after felt like static. No sound, no direction, just the hum of something broken. My phone barely lit up except for spam calls and automated job rejection emails. We've decided to move forward with other candidates. Every message looked identical, like they'd all been written by the same ghost. I'd spent a decade cleaning up other people's messes, documenting every policy breach, every contract misstep, but there was no document for this kind of emptiness. I woke up early out of habit, made coffee, and stared at the same clock until noon. The house was too quiet. My sister, Angela, drove down from Dayton after 2 weeks, her SUV full of sympathy and casseroles. She talked about moving on, about starting fresh somewhere else. But starting over sounded like being invisible again, and I'd already been erased once. She stayed for a night, tried to make me laugh, then hugged me goodbye in that cautious way people do when they know they can't fix you. The next day, I cleaned my desk. I found a stack of old business cards, a cracked mug from a trade show, and a USB key labeled Site Audit 2017. I plugged it in out of reflex, expecting nothing. Instead, folders opened like ghosts, names of projects long buried. One file caught my eye, HR Review Redact. Log. My stomach tightened. I clicked it open. Inside were comments, tracked changes, and timestamps from when Belinda updated the harassment case files 3 years earlier. The same case that mysteriously disappeared before the board review. I remembered the meeting. The VP accused of misconduct, the report that got rewritten overnight, and the victim who suddenly resigned without a word. I'd questioned it then. Belinda had smiled too quickly, said it was resolved. That was the day I stopped trusting smiles. I dug deeper, tracing edits and approvals. Grant's digital signature appeared in the margin of every altered document. I felt the chill creep up my arms. They'd buried people before, just like they buried me. I closed the laptop, heart pounding, and leaned back in my chair. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, painting the living room in weak orange. I thought about emailing the board anonymously, but what good would that do? HR controlled the narrative. They always did. Then I remembered something, the old compliance training servers we decommissioned years ago. I was the one who'd built the backup path before we retired the system. If those servers were still dormant, they might still contain copies of every original report, untouched by Belinda's edits. I went to the closet, pushed past winter coats, and pulled out a weathered box. Inside were old drives, connectors, and my first work laptop, covered in dust. My hands shook as I lifted it out. I plugged it in. The screen flickered, hesitated, then hummed to life, the Helion logo ghosting across the display before fading to black. The old archive window blinked on. Offline mode enabled. I exhaled a shaky laugh. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath for years. Maybe I couldn't undo what they did, but I could still remember. And maybe, just maybe, I could make the system remember too. The old laptop wheezed like it was waking from a coma, fans sputtering against the dust of a forgotten decade. The desktop loaded with pixelated icons and file names I barely remembered. My fingers hovered over the mousepad as if touching something sacred. When I opened the Compliance Backup folder, a list of directories appeared, organized by year. I clicked on 2019, my last major audit cycle, before the company modernized everything. The folder contained mirrored logs, video exports, scanned forms, things that shouldn't even exist anymore. My heart thudded in my throat as I clicked deeper. One subfolder, titled HR Internal Review, had been hidden behind layers of misdirection, a random string of characters and a false creation date. I recognized my own trick. I used to hide sensitive files that way before the cloud migration. I double-clicked. Inside were recordings, not text, short clips from conference rooms and private offices, captured automatically by the internal security software I once managed. The software had been designed for liability protection, to monitor interviews, exits, and complaints. Most people forgot it even existed. Belinda must have forgotten too. The first clip opened to grainy video of her office, sunlight cutting across her desk. Grant Weller sat opposite her, jacket draped on the chair, voice low but clear. "We can't let this escalate," he said. Belinda leaned forward, whispering, "Then we'll file it as resolved. Adjust the narrative." I froze, hands trembling. This was the harassment case, the one that disappeared. The date stamp confirmed it, 3 days before the official closure report. I skipped ahead to another clip, this one showing Belinda talking to the HR assistant. "Reword the witness section," she said sharply. "Make it sound consensual. Keep it short." I stopped the playback. My stomach turned. The proof wasn't just in the edits, it was in their voices, their confidence, their certainty that no one would ever find these files. I minimized the window, opened another document. Archive Personal. There it was, the scanned NDA from that same case with 2 different signature layers, one real, one forged. Belinda's name appeared twice, once as the HR witness, once disguised as the complainant. It was cleaner than fraud, it was artful deception. And now, I had the brushstrokes. I sat back in my chair, staring at the evidence glowing in front of me. For a long time, I didn't move. I thought of the woman whose complaint vanished, of how easily truth had been rewritten by people who smiled while they buried others. I whispered into the dark room, they thought no one was watching. But someone had been. Me. And now it was time for the system they built to finally turn against them. I didn't sleep that night. The clips replayed in my mind, each sentence from Belinda and Grant echoing like a confession I hadn't asked for. I sat in the dim light of my kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound as I wrote everything down by hand. Dates, file names, timestamps. It felt old-fashioned, almost primitive. But it made the chaos real. I knew enough about how they operated to realize what would come next. If they sensed a leak, they would scrub everything clean, rewrite the logs, and maybe even pin the breach on me. They'd done it before to others. That's why I couldn't just run to a lawyer or the press. Without a full digital trail, they'd twist my story until I looked like a bitter ex-employee with an agenda. I needed to rebuild the chain of custody, make the evidence undeniable. Somewhere around 3 a.m., I remembered the shadow infrastructure we used years ago, an old mirrored backup server that had never been fully decommissioned because no one could find the password. I was the one who had set it up, back when Helion still trusted me to handle its compliance architecture. The password wasn't random. It was hidden in plain sight, buried inside a defunct training portal I'd written. I booted the old laptop again, fingers trembling as I connected through a dusty Ethernet cable. The command prompt blinked, waiting. I entered the old string, policy, truth, audit, root. The screen froze for a moment, then came to life with a quiet line of text. Archive access granted. I leaned back, exhaling in disbelief. The ghost system still lived. I navigated through the directories until I found the drive labeled Helion Mirror A01. When I clicked it open, the structure unfolded like an X-ray of the company's skeleton. Finance, HR, legal, ops, every forgotten corner intact. I began to cross-reference the metadata from my external drive with the mirror's untouched versions. The patterns matched perfectly. timestamps, edits, and even the hidden revision history behind the altered NDAs. Every falsified document Belinda touched left a digital fingerprint. The beauty of compliance systems is that they're designed to prove their own authenticity. Tampering just adds more evidence. By sunrise, I had assembled a folder that could outlive me, a digital dossier of everything they'd done, organized by year, tagged with authentication keys that no internal IT department could fake. I encrypted it 3 times and stored duplicates on separate flash drives, each hidden in plain sight. One inside a cookbook, one taped beneath the baseboard of my desk, and one sent through an anonymous cloud relay to a storage node overseas. The ghost of my work was now decentralized. Even if they tried to silence me, the truth was already seeded in too many places to be erased. Around 7, exhaustion hit me like a wave, but my phone buzzed before I could rest. A message from Miguel, one of the old tech engineers, popped up from a personal email address. "They're purging the archives this week. Belinda ordered it. Full wipe." I stared at the screen. She was moving fast, faster than I'd expected. If they finished the purge, even the federal audit systems might lose traceability. I typed back a single line. "Let them." Miguel responded with a confused question mark, but I knew what I was doing. Every delete command, every purge, every overwritten file would trigger a silent backup in the mirror system I'd just reactivated. The more they tried to erase, the more evidence would duplicate. For the first time since the day I was fired, I felt something stronger than fear: control. The system that once buried me was about to start digging for me. All I had to do was wait. 3 days passed before the real crack appeared. It started with a text from an unknown number. "Halion servers offline. HR data migration failed." No signature, no context, just that. My pulse quickened. I knew that phrase. It meant Belinda's team had tried to overwrite the compliance archives and tripped the mirror system I reactivated. They had just pulled their own pin. I opened my laptop, logged into the encrypted relay, and watched as thousands of log entries updated in real time. Every file they tried to delete created a time-stamped duplicate, auto-tagged illegal overwrite. The irony was poetic. Their cover-up was documenting itself. Still, I knew timing mattered. The evidence alone wouldn't protect me unless it landed in the right hands, at the right moment. I needed it to go somewhere they couldn't control, federal oversight. But I couldn't send it directly from my address. It would trace back, so I spent the night creating a masked route through an old compliance test server that was still registered under an inactive vendor. By morning, I had a clean digital tunnel. I packaged the evidence, encrypted the files, and labeled the submission Ethics Inquiry, Halion Dynamics HR Practices. The final step required a trigger, a single signal to release everything if something happened to me. I wrote a simple script that would auto-send the archive to multiple watchdog agencies if I didn't enter a verification code every 48 hours. Then, at exactly 6:47 a.m., I hit send. The upload bar crawled forward like a heartbeat. When it finished, I closed the laptop and just stared at the sunlight creeping through the blinds. My coffee went cold on the counter. I should have felt relief, but what I felt instead was the quiet before a storm. Around noon, my phone started buzzing. News alerts, LinkedIn updates, internal leaks. Halion, under federal review for compliance irregularities. The article was vague, but I recognized the wording. Someone at the agency had moved fast. The story referenced an anonymous data packet containing verifiable HR evidence of misconduct. My lips curved without meaning to. It had begun. That afternoon, Grant held an emergency staff meeting. A former coworker texted me a photo from inside the conference room. Belinda standing at the podium, face pale, reading from a printed statement. I zoomed in and caught the headline of the slide behind her, Unverified Claims of Data Breach. I almost laughed. They still didn't understand that their own deletions were the breach. I shut my phone and leaned back in my chair. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was ahead. The trigger was set, the fuse lit, and every step they took to hide their crimes would only feed the system that remembered everything they forgot. They wanted a clean slate. I was about to give them one, written in fire and timestamps. It was the second night after the leak when the message arrived, short and unsigned. Verification request, audit validation. It wasn't spam. The sender's domain ended with gov. My chest tightened as I clicked it open. Inside was a single line. Please confirm authenticity of metadata sample 4A77 within 24 hours. They had my evidence, and now they needed my fingerprint to make it official. For a second, I hesitated. Anonymity had been my shield, but this was the doorway to legitimacy. I opened the encrypted mirror drive and found sample 4A77, a segment from the original harassment file, including Belinda's voice edit and Grant's digital sign-off. I verified the checksum and replied through the same masked channel. 30 minutes later, another message came back. Data chain confirmed. Further contact. Unnecessary. My hands trembled, but I smiled. Somewhere, deep inside the bureaucracy, the truth had been validated. Meanwhile, Helian's panic rippled outward. A friend from IT messaged me through Signal. Belinda's losing it. She's blaming a rogue backup system, calls it the ghost server. I almost laughed. She was chasing my shadow. I knew she'd start hunting old credentials next, so I prepared the trap. Years ago, I'd written a maintenance script that required dual authentication to disable certain archive nodes. It wasn't tied to employee IDs. It was tied to hardware keys. One of those keys was still in my possession, hidden inside the broken USB adapter from my first week on the job. I found it at the bottom of a drawer, snapped open the casing, and slid out the tiny silver chip, no bigger than a paperclip. That chip was my proof of authorship, the one thing connecting me to the infrastructure they still depended on. Without it, the network couldn't fully purge anything. I plugged it into the old laptop and entered the line of code that would quietly log every attempt to breach or shut down the mirrored system. Each new attempt would ping a copy to the Federal Archive already holding my packet. In other words, the more they tried to cover their tracks, the more they'd expose themselves. I sat back, feeling the shift for the first time, the weight of fear lifting, replaced by something calmer, colder. They thought the story was about a bitter ex-employee trying to get even. They didn't realize it was about a system architect reclaiming authorship. My access key wasn't revenge. It was recognition. And now, the machine finally knew my name again. The following morning, I woke up to the faint vibration of my phone against the nightstand. Messages flooded in one after another. News alerts, whispers from former co-workers, an anonymous thread on an employee forum titled, The Ghost in Helian. I didn't have to open it to know what they were talking about. The system I'd built had started breathing again, invisible but alive. Every time Belinda's team touched a deleted file, the mirror system automatically restored it in a hidden directory marked Integrity Hold. It wasn't magic. It was code I'd written years ago to safeguard against internal fraud, back when Grant still called me the conscience of the company. The irony was exquisite. Now that conscience had turned into their prosecutor. I opened my laptop and logged into a watcher portal I'd created the night before, the screen filling with status updates. I could see everything: file movements, login attempts, failed purges, panic edits. Belinda's ID flashed across the dashboard 20 times in 1 hour, then again with higher-level admin privileges. She was escalating, Each attempt was recorded and sent to the federal audit endpoint, time-stamped, geolocated, and verified against her own credentials. She was digging her own digital grave. I leaned back, sipping coffee gone lukewarm, and watched their chaos unfold. It was like watching a crime scene replay itself in slow motion, every keystroke leaving another breadcrumb. They still thought the breach was external. I could tell from the frantic email drafts appearing in the system logs. To all staff, please refrain from speculative conversation regarding recent network anomalies. I imagined Belinda pacing her office, nails tapping, trying to control the uncontrollable. Somewhere around midday, the first internal memo leaked to the press, an anonymous source confirming that the deleted HR archives had reappeared overnight. The article was cautious, quoting unnamed insiders about phantom backups and unexplained data restorations. I knew exactly which files they'd seen. The harassment settlement folder, the one she'd thought was gone forever. Each restored file carried my silent watermark, a tiny string of metadata reading Compliance root original. It wasn't visible unless you looked for it, but to any digital forensic examiner, it screamed authenticity. Around 3 p.m., I watched as Grant's account logged in for the first time in days. His actions were erratic, downloading, renaming, encrypting random documents in what looked like desperation. He wasn't protecting the company. He was protecting himself. I could almost feel the tension radiating through the screen. Then something unexpected happened. A system-wide lockdown alert flashed red. Emergency security freeze initiated by Administrator Weller G. Grant had pulled the plug. He thought that would stop the ghost. What he didn't understand was that the freeze protocol automatically mirrored all active data to the off-site recovery node. My system wasn't just alive. It was regenerative. Every keystroke, every panic command, every attempt to shut it down became part of the permanent record. I saw his final message to the internal IT lead. Find whoever's doing this. Contain it. Now. I almost pitied them. They were fighting the architecture of their own deceit. At dusk, the building cameras, still linked to Helion's internal grid, captured Belinda storming through the corridors with 2 compliance aides in tow, carrying external drives like lifeboats. She didn't realize the drives were already compromised. The mirror process had duplicated their contents hours ago. She was evacuating ghosts. I watched all this from my kitchen table, the glow of the laptop reflecting off my coffee mug. It felt strange. Powerful, yes, but also sad. I didn't enjoy their panic. I just understood it. I had lived it when they erased me. The difference was, I'd turned that erasure into a network of memory. Every deleted truth was now a pulse in the machine. Every lie feeding its strength. I minimized the monitoring window, opened the encrypted backup, and renamed the project one final time. Operation Call. A soft, chime-confirmed synchronization with all remote nodes. The ghost was now self-sustaining. Even if I vanished tomorrow, it would keep transmitting the truth on schedule, every 72 hours, to every oversight authority on the list. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet hum of my kitchen. Outside, rain had started, soft and rhythmic against the window. It sounded almost like breathing, the sound of something alive, something that refused to stay buried. The first story broke just before sunrise on a local business news feed, short, cautious, the kind of article that disappears by noon if no one clicks it. But this one didn't fade. Within hours, 3 larger outlets picked it up. Whistleblower exposes suppression inside Helion Dynamics HR division. The words hit like static through my veins. I hadn't spoken to anyone, hadn't shared my name, but I didn't have to. The data spoke louder than I ever could. I opened the article and saw screenshots of internal memos, audit red lines, and the line that made my chest tighten. Independent verification confirms these files are original, with timestamps tracing back over 5 years. That single sentence meant my architecture had worked. The verification signatures embedded in the files had authenticated themselves automatically. There was no denying the truth now. Still, I knew the wave was just beginning. By mid-morning, the company issued a statement calling it a malicious digital fabrication. I expected that, but what I didn't expect was the follow-up. An anonymous insider from IT confirming to reporters that the phantom backups matched Helion's internal record structure. Someone on the inside was helping without even realizing it. My phone buzzed nonstop. Former colleagues, some angry, some grateful, all confused. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I watched the pattern form. Each time Helion denied a claim, another document surfaced: contract copies, payroll reports, even fragments of security footage. The system wasn't just backing up anymore. It was releasing data in chronological order, like a heartbeat syncing to the rhythm of public curiosity. By afternoon, a journalist I vaguely recognized from a prior compliance summit emailed me from a verified address. "We believe you built this. Can we talk?" My hands hovered over the keyboard. I typed and deleted 3 different responses, then finally sent, "Not yet. Let the evidence speak first." Because that was the rule of integrity: proof before personality. Around the same time, a press photo surfaced. Belinda leaving the Helion building, sunglasses hiding her eyes, mouth tight as a lock. Behind her, 2 security officers carried boxes of drives and folders into a black SUV. The caption read, "Helion's HR director declines comment." My pulse steadied. I knew those drives. I knew they were hollow, stripped shells of the same data that was already everywhere. That night, the Federal Oversight Division confirmed a preliminary inquiry into Helion's internal compliance failures. The networks exploded. Stock tickers turned red. Employees leaked emails. Shareholders demanded explanations. And Grant Weller's name began trending for all the wrong reasons. Watching it unfold was surreal. The same company that had wiped me clean from its records was now drowning in a flood of its own history. But this wasn't revenge. It was gravity. Truth, once unburied, falls with its own weight. As I closed the article and powered down the laptop, I thought of the night they escorted me out. The look on Belinda's face, that subtle relief of someone who thought she'd silenced a problem. If only she knew the silence she created had been the loudest sound of all. The story was everywhere by morning, echoing through newsrooms and social feeds like a chain reaction that couldn't be contained. Every time Helion issued a denial, a new piece of proof surfaced from nowhere: a memo, an altered NDA, a server log. The network of duplication I'd set in motion had begun to operate on instinct, mirroring their panic in real time. They tried to fight the narrative with statements about external manipulation, but the forensic confirmations came faster than their excuses. Each report carried one phrase that made me catch my breath. Validated through internal compliance checksum. That was my signature, the invisible watermark I'd embedded years ago. The machine I built was now speaking my language to the world. By noon, the stock had dropped 12%. Grant held a press conference in a desperate attempt to steady investors. He looked older, jaw tight, voice wavering between rehearsed confidence and fatigue. "These allegations misrepresent our culture," he said, eyes darting toward the reporters who already knew he was lying. I watched it unfold on my living room TV, coffee untouched in my hand. He talked about modernization, integrity, innovation. All the same words they used the day they erased me. I should have felt vindicated, but what I felt was quieter, heavier. It wasn't satisfaction. It was inevitability. You can't build a company on deception and expect it to stand. By afternoon, federal agents had arrived at Helion's headquarters with sealed subpoenas. Cameras caught them walking past the same reception desk where I once stood signing visitor logs. The image felt strange, like watching my own ghost walk through the frame. Text messages from old coworkers trickled in. "It's happening." "You were right." "Thank you." I didn't answer any of them. I didn't need to. Their voices were proof enough that memory had survived the deletion. Around 6, another update rolled across the news ticker. Federal oversight confirms validity of whistleblower evidence. Helion faces multi-agency review. The echo had grown louder than any denial could drown out. I stepped outside into the cold air, letting the evening wind hit my face. The neighborhood was quiet, unaware that an entire corporation was cracking open downtown. I thought about the people still working there, the ones too afraid to speak, the ones who stayed silent when I walked out. Maybe now they'd understand that silence doesn't protect you, it preserves the rot. As I stood in the fading light, a strange calm settled in. I didn't need to push anymore. The truth was moving on its own, rippling through systems I'd once helped design, reaching rooms I'd never entered. The echo had become its own voice, steady, relentless, and impossible to mute. The hearing took place on a gray Thursday, the kind of day that made everything feel heavier. I wasn't in the room, but I didn't have to be. The board had convened an emergency session with federal oversight present, and every live update spilled into my feed like pieces of a puzzle I'd been building for months. Inside the conference room on the 22nd floor of Helion's downtown office, 10 board members sat around a polished oak table, their voices low, but their expressions tense. Across from them sat Grant Weller and Belinda Cross. Their names were trending, their reputations already shredded before the meeting began. The first document projected onto the screen was an internal audit chain, metadata, confirming 5 years of falsified HR reports, all signed under Belinda's credentials. The second slide displayed the settlement record from the harassment case they thought was buried. A federal officer explained how the digital signatures had been authenticated through the checksum chain. My checksum chain. Then came the footage. The audio from the archive I'd uncovered played for the entire room, Grant's voice low and deliberate, saying, "We can't let this escalate." And Belinda responding, "We'll adjust the narrative." Those 6 words shattered whatever illusion of control they had left. The silence afterward was longer than the clip itself. A board member asked Grant if he wanted to respond. He tried to clear his throat, but his voice cracked. "That conversation was taken out of context," he said. The agent beside him lifted a hand, stopping him. "The context is right here, Mr. Weller," she said, holding up a printed transcript. "You signed the falsified report 3 days later." He sank back in his chair. Belinda's face had gone pale, her usual poise gone. She tried to blame the ghost server, claiming it was manipulated by an outsider. But the forensic specialist confirmed that the mirror system's root code matched Helion's legacy framework, something only an internal architect could have written. "So no," the specialist said, calm and certain. "This wasn't an external breach. This was a built-in safeguard." I could almost imagine Belinda's eyes widening, realizing she'd been undone by the very compliance system she once called outdated. As the evidence unfolded, a new name appeared on the screen. Compliance Architect D. Myers. My name. Not spoken aloud, but visible to everyone who mattered. I froze when I saw the photo, an old ID scan from years ago, grainy but unmistakable. For a second, I thought I'd feel fear, maybe regret. Instead, what I felt was a kind of stillness, like standing in a quiet field after a storm. They couldn't erase me now. My name was embedded in the system's DNA. The session ran 3 hours. When it ended, the board chair read the motion. Immediate suspension of both executives, pending legal review, and full cooperation with the federal inquiry. Grant stood, tried to speak, then stopped. He looked smaller somehow, like a man realizing that power isn't protection when truth has memory. Belinda didn't stand at all. Cameras caught them leaving the building separately, faces tight, jaws set. The same guards who once escorted me out now watched them walk through the lobby. I sat on my couch watching it live, the glow from the TV flickering across my hands. It didn't feel like victory, it felt like exhale, a release years overdue. My phone buzzed with a message from Miguel. "They're gone. You did it." But I hadn't. The system had. The ghost I built, the one born out of humiliation and silence, had finally spoken for itself. I turned off the TV, leaned back, and closed my eyes. For the first time in 12 years, Helion dynamics existed without them, and somehow, because of me. The next morning, my inbox lit up like a warning flare. Anonymous numbers, blocked addresses, reporters I'd never spoken to before, all asking the same question. "Are you the whistleblower?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. The last thing I wanted was to become a headline. But Grant Weller did what cornered men always do. He tried to twist the story before it hardened into fact. By noon, his attorney released a statement claiming that the so-called whistleblower had stolen company data in violation of privacy laws. My name wasn't printed, but I didn't need to read between the lines to know who they meant. Every sentence was a trap designed to bait me into defending myself publicly, to drag me into the same arena where they had control. But I had learned how they fought, and I knew that silence could be stronger than noise. Instead of reacting, I gathered what I'd kept in reserve, the one clause they'd all forgotten about. Years ago, during Helion's early expansions, I'd drafted the company's own data preservation policy, a document that became the backbone of our compliance system. It included a small, easily overlooked line buried under Section 12.4. Authorized compliance personnel may retain copies of relevant audit data for federal review in the event of suspected misconduct. That clause had my signature on it, and it had never been revoked. I printed the original and slipped it into a plain envelope. No explanations, no emotional pleas, just the document and a cover letter stating, per Section 12.4, this data was lawfully preserved for oversight review. I mailed it directly to the federal office already handling Helion's case. 2 days later, a press release went out confirming that the whistleblower had acted within contractual compliance preservation parameters. The attempt to criminalize me backfired. Grant's own lawyers had to admit the clause was valid, because removing it would invalidate years of their audit history. I watched the news feed quietly as talking heads debated whether Helion's leadership misread its own rules. It was almost poetic. They'd tried to weaponize my work against me, only to discover that my work had built the shield protecting me. That night, Miguel called, his voice tight with disbelief. "They're saying you used their own clause to clear yourself." I smiled faintly. "No," I said. "I used our clause. I wrote it." There was silence on the line, then a quiet laugh. "You know they hate that, right?" I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "They should. It means I knew how to finish a fight before they even knew it started." Outside, the wind pushed against the windows, sharp and cold, but I didn't feel it. The war of noise had ended, and the truth stood untouched, printed in their own policies. I didn't need to argue innocence. I documented it years ago. The morning Helion fell apart started deceptively calm. The sky over downtown was cloudless, the air sharp, almost too clear. I was at my kitchen table again, same spot where it had all started, when the alert popped up on my screen. Helion Dynamics Executive Offices. Federal agents on site. For a moment, I just stared, unsure if it was real. Then the first live footage hit the news feeds. 2 black SUVs parked outside the building, agents in dark jackets walking in with sealed folders and digital forensics kits. They moved with the quiet precision of people who had done this before. Behind the glass doors, employees watched in stunned silence. No one was escorted out yet, but the tension hung thick enough to see. By 10 a.m., the announcement came through. CEO Grant Weller and HR Director Belinda Cross placed on administrative leave pending investigation. That phrase, pending investigation, was corporate code for exile. I muted the television and opened my laptop to the compliance dashboard still accessible through my legacy account. The system logs told the real story. Overnight, 27 user accounts had been suspended, 2 servers quarantined, and the HR directory completely locked. A network that once erased people now erased its own masters. For years, I'd been the one quietly fixing errors, maintaining integrity in the background. Now the system was correcting itself, and it didn't need my help. Messages began flooding my inbox, co-workers, board members, even one from an old client. "We saw the report. Everything you said was true." I should have felt vindicated, but the emotion that came wasn't joy. It was a deep, exhausted relief, like the release after holding your breath underwater for too long. I walked outside, the sunlight warm against my face, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel the weight of invisibility. Inside that building, agents were collecting hard drives and interviewing staff in glass-walled conference rooms. Belinda was photographed leaving the premises, clutching a coat around herself, head bowed. Grant wasn't seen at all. Some said he'd left through a service entrance, others that he'd stayed in his office until they cut the power to his floor. Either way, their empire of jargon and intimidation had finally caved in on itself. Later that afternoon, Helion's stock plummeted and investor confidence vanished like smoke. The board issued a statement about transparency and accountability, promising a new era of leadership. They didn't mention my name, but I didn't need them to. My name was already woven through every document they'd tried to hide, every checksum, every metadata tag that now existed as public record. The reporters called it a compliance revolution. I called it math, the simple balance of cause and consequence. Toward evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, I passed by the Helion building on my way downtown. From the sidewalk, I could see the flicker of computer screens inside, rows of terminals blinking with disconnected alerts. I thought about the day I'd walked out of those same doors, holding a cardboard box of my things, feeling small and disposable. Now, those same doors stood open, revolving endlessly as investigators came and went. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it hums quietly through fiber cables and forgotten backups, spreading truth line by line until there's nowhere left for lies to hide. As I stood there watching, I realized something simple. Helion didn't collapse because I fought them. It collapsed because it forgot what it meant to remember. 3 weeks passed before the email arrived. It was simple, direct, with no company logo or flattery, just a single line from Helion's interim board secretary. Request for consultation regarding operational rebuild. I stared at it for a long time, uncertain whether to laugh or delete it. The same corporation that had erased me was now asking for help, resurrecting itself. I waited a full day before replying. I'll consider it if the work reports directly to the board and no one else. 2 hours later, they agreed. No negotiation. No delay. They were desperate, and I had become the only person who understood the bones of their broken system. When I returned to the building, the first thing I noticed was the quiet. The glass doors slid open without the usual hum of background chatter or the sharp scent of Belinda's perfume. The lobby felt sterile, stripped of pretense. Even the company logo had been removed from the wall, leaving faint adhesive outlines where the letters used to be. I signed in at the reception desk, and the guard, one of the same men who had escorted me out months before, looked up, recognition flickering across his face. "Welcome back, Ms. Myers," he said softly. No one said that name here anymore. It almost startled me to hear it spoken out loud. Upstairs, the executive floor was a ghost town. The flower carts and motivational neon signs were gone, replaced with cardboard boxes and stacks of old files, awaiting review. The office that used to belong to Grant sat empty, chair pushed back, as if he'd left in the middle of a sentence. My new workspace was smaller but cleaner, an unmarked room facing east, filled with filtered morning light. There was a single folder on the desk, labeled simply Rebuild Plan. Inside were 3 bullet points: stabilize operations, review compliance chain, restore trust. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been fired for being out of alignment with cultural tone, and now they wanted me to rebuild the culture itself. The first week I kept my head down, listening more than talking. Employees moved carefully through the hallways, still unsure which words were safe to say. Some nodded politely when they saw me. Others looked away, guilt in their eyes. I didn't blame them. Fear had a long half-life in places like this. I spent my nights in that same office, mapping the network from scratch. The old mirror architecture was still active, humming quietly in the background, untouched by the purge attempts. It had become a living archive of everything that went wrong, a silent mentor reminding me not to repeat it. I stripped away redundancies, removed privileged back doors, and wrote new integrity scripts with one rule at the core. No one person should ever hold the power to rewrite truth. On the second Friday, the board chair stopped by unannounced. A tall man with careful eyes, he watched me work in silence before finally speaking. "You didn't have to come back," he said. "You could have left us to sink." I closed my laptop. "I didn't come back for you," I said. "I came back for the people who were scared to speak." He nodded, maybe understanding, maybe not. Before leaving, he added, "We'll need a new slogan for the relaunch. Something honest." I almost smiled. "Try this," I said. "Integrity isn't a department." He wrote it down. When he left, I stood at the window and watched the cranes across the street lifting steel beams into place. The city looked the same, but something inside me had shifted. The revenge was never about humiliation. It was about restoration. Every corrupted line of code I rewrote felt like a small act of forgiveness for myself, for the people who stayed quiet, even for the system that once tried to delete me. Justice had already been done. What remained now was rebuilding something worth remembering. 2 months after I returned, Helion felt almost human again. The chaos had cooled into something resembling honesty. The new leadership team spoke plainly in meetings, without buzzwords or corporate camouflage. People no longer whispered in corridors, they talked. I didn't realize how much noise guilt had made in that building until it finally went quiet. One afternoon, I met Miguel at the diner down the street, the same place we used to grab coffee during late audit weeks. The vinyl booth creaked the same way. The pie tasted just as bad, but somehow it felt different, lighter, like the air had been reset. He leaned across the table, grinning. "So, you're the legend now," he said. "Every intern knows your name." I rolled my eyes. "I'd rather they remember the system, not me." He laughed. "They're the same thing, Dora." I looked down at my cup, the steam curling upward. Maybe once, I said. But systems need people who believe in them, not just the ones who build them. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city moved outside the window, cars, voices, small, everyday lives that kept going, no matter how large your storm once was. Miguel reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded newspaper. "You see this?" he asked, tapping a headline about another corporation under investigation. "You started something bigger than Helion." I smiled faintly. "Maybe," I said, "or maybe the world just remembered how to ask questions again." He nodded, and for a long minute we just sat there in comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't need to fill itself with words. As he left, he squeezed my shoulder. "You made sure the truth didn't disappear," he said. After he was gone, I stayed a while longer, listening to the clatter of plates, the hum of old jukebox music. I thought about that night months ago when I sat alone at my kitchen table, convinced that everything I was had been erased. I didn't know then that being erased sometimes gives you the freedom to start over without permission. I paid the bill, stepped outside, and tilted my face toward the pale afternoon sun. The air smelled like rain and possibility. Justice hadn't made me whole, but it had made me visible again, and that was enough. When the board asked me to record a short internal video for Helion's new ethics program, I almost said no. But then I thought about the people still too afraid to speak, the ones who watched the old regime crumble but still doubted that honesty could survive here. So I stood in front of a plain gray backdrop, no logo, no polish, just me, and told them what I'd learned. "Some people think silence keeps you safe," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "It doesn't. It only buys time for the wrong people to get louder." I paused, letting the quiet settle. When they erased my name, I thought that was the end. But I learned something important. Memory doesn't live in systems or files or even in titles. It lives in us. Every time you tell the truth, you restore a little piece of what was broken. The cameraman gave a small nod, and I continued, speaking not from bitterness, but clarity. If you ever find yourself cornered, if the choice is between keeping your peace or keeping your integrity, choose integrity. Peace built on lies doesn't last. The words weren't rehearsed. They came out simple, the way truth usually does. I finished with one final thought. I didn't win by fighting louder. I won by documenting, by remembering. That's the kind of strength no one can fire. When the recording ended, the room stayed still for a moment before anyone spoke. The HR coordinator wiped her eyes quietly, and I realized the message wasn't just for them. It was for me, too. I walked out into the hallway, sunlight spilling across the floor, and thought about how strange it was that the same company that once silenced me was now asking me to teach it how to listen. Maybe that was the real victory. Not revenge, not redemption, just the slow rebuilding of a culture that finally understood that truth, no matter how inconvenient, is the only thing worth protecting. Spring came early that year. The snow melted from the office rooftop before March ended, leaving streaks of sunlight across the windows I once walked past with my head down. Now, every morning, I arrived with the quiet confidence of someone who had already survived the worst version of herself. Helion wasn't perfect, no company ever is, but it breathed differently now. The walls didn't echo with fear anymore. They carried the low hum of real work being done by people who trusted the ground beneath them. One afternoon, I walked through the operations floor, checking progress on the new compliance rebuild. I stopped near a cubicle where a young analyst was reviewing an audit log, her brow furrowed in concentration. She looked up, startled to see me. "Ms. Myers," she said quickly, "I found a discrepancy in the vendor file. Should I flag it or rerun the check first? I smiled. Flag it, I said. Always flag it, even if it turns out clean. She nodded, relief softening her shoulders. Watching her return to the screen, I felt a strange warmth, like seeing a seed take root in soil that once rejected it. Later, I stood at the large window overlooking the construction site next door. Cranes swung lazily against the skyline, metal beams rising where empty lots once were. Progress, renewal, all of it quiet, steady, earned. I took my ID badge from my pocket, running my thumb over the photo. The same face, same name, but somehow it looked different now, more grounded, more certain. I clipped it back onto my jacket and whispered to no one in particular, I remember. Behind me, the office clock ticked, marking another hour in a place that finally learned how to keep time, honestly. As I gathered my bag, I glanced once more at the empty desk across from mine, the one Belinda used to occupy, and felt nothing but calm. The story was finished. The company would go on, maybe even thrive, but I no longer belonged to it. I stepped outside into the crisp evening air, the city lights blinking awake one by one, and for the first time in years, the world felt open, unwritten, and mine. When they fired me, I thought the world had gone silent. In a way, it had. Emails stopped, phones stopped. My name vanished from every record I ever touched. But in that silence, I learned something I never could have discovered while the noise was still flattering me. The quiet power of documentation, patience, and preparation. People think strength looks like confrontation, like shouting truth across a boardroom table. I used to believe that too. What I learned is that real strength is quieter. It hides in habits no one praises. The nightly backup, the extra copy of a report, the choice to write down what everyone else forgets. Those small acts of diligence became the foundation of my survival. My story isn't about revenge. It's about record keeping. Every system has flaws. Every leadership team believes they're invincible, and every corrupt process leaves traces for those who bother to look. I didn't have an army or an audience. I had data, timestamps, and memory. That was enough. So, if you're sitting in a job where you're told to just trust the process, remember this. Documentation isn't cynicism. It's self-respect. 4 practical lessons. I took away: never rely on verbal promises. What's spoken can be denied. What's written becomes reality. Keep clean records for yourself. Don't hoard secrets. Keep integrity-protected copies of your work. Don't rush to expose. Observe first. Sometimes the system collapses under the weight of its own evidence. Forgive, but don't forget. Let go of the bitterness, but keep the lesson sharpened in memory. In the end, what saved me wasn't brilliance. It was consistency. The small, uncelebrated discipline of doing things right when no one was watching. When they erased me, those habits turned into my armor. When they lied, those same records became my voice. I didn't shout my truth. I archived it, and that made all the difference. How to get started today. Back up your work, digitally and mentally. Treat your knowledge as part of your worth. Write down decisions, even small ones. Patterns only appear when you can see the timeline. Keep professional boundaries clear. Loyalty is valuable, but blind loyalty is dangerous. Trust slow preparation more than fast reaction. Quiet work always outlasts loud deceit. What about you? Have you ever seen someone's quiet diligence become their strength? Tell me your story. I think we're long overdue to start honoring the people who remember.